Is it just the two of us?
I think it may be.
Okay.
We would love for you guys to start by introducing yourselves. We'll have some questions about your backgrounds and some questions about Metro issues. And this isn't a debate, but we would encourage you to respond to each other's. If you want to follow up or dispute or agree with something your opponent says, please do so civilly. We have about a half an hour before we have more candidates behind you, so let's get started. Duncan, why don't we start with you? If you will describe, people who are going to watch this on our website don't know the district and they don't know its geographic contours.
Okay.
And just mention that it's a nonpartisan race. That would be great.
Okay.
So we get a brief bio and why you're running.
Do I do an intro of a district first and then the bio?
Sure.
Okay. So, good afternoon. Hi, my name is Duncan Huang. I'm the current Metro Councilor for District 6 for Metro, and it extends from basically the Beaverton city limits to 122nd Avenue, and then from 84 down to the Clackamas border. So it's a really wide and diverse district. And I am running. I was appointed in January to carry on Councilor Bob Stacey's legacy, who had to retire for medical reasons. And I'm also still serving in the leadership role at APANO, the Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon. And I've really been focused.
What's your position at APANO?
Associate Director.
Okay.
And I've been really focused on housing and transportation and workforce development for the last decade or so. I have been really proud to work on 82nd Avenue jurisdictional transfer. I was part of a coalition that secured $185 million from the state and local government to get that transferred out of the city. I've been an affordable housing developer, so I was instrumental in developing the Orchards of 82nd and Division.
Was that an APANO development, or was that something you did before APANO? Or something?
Oh, that's an APANO development. Yeah. We did in conjunction with Rose.
And what role did you play individually? I mean, were you a finance guy, or you?
I led the community visioning for process. I ran the capital campaign for the APANO headquarters, and then I was part of a development team for the housing and the commercial space. We're also part owners of the building.
Okay. Let's back up. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Upper Michigan. My family are immigrants from Taiwan. My mom opened the first Chinese restaurant in Upper Michigan.
What's up? You mean the UP?
The UP, that's right.
Where?
Houghton, Michigan. Just north of Marquette, and it's a very snowy and cold place, but a nice place to grow up and visit. My mom opened the first Chinese restaurant there, and I grew up as a restaurant kid, and that's kind of really shaped my worldview as a small business, small business family. English wasn't my first language, and I remember growing up and translating and interpreting for my family, my mom's in particular, as needed. Today I have opportunity to advocate for my communities across the district and in East Portland.
How'd you get to Oregon? What brought you here?
I went to Lewis and Clark Law School.
Got it.
Yep.
So, did you practice law after law school?
I worked as an attorney, or in the legal world. I did corporate work in Asia, so I was based in China, and I helped plan the Olympics. I did the legal work, and it's not as glamorous as it sounds.
Wait, the
2008 Beijing Games.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Were you in Beijing?
I was. Yeah, I lived in Beijing for about 5 years after law school, and really got to experience kind of a fast-growing city.
Was your client the Olympic Committee?
Yes. And a city of 23 million people that was experiencing a lot of change, and that was a great experience for my late 20s, early 30s. And I came back to Oregon in 2012 and found a job on idealist.org at APANO, and have been there ever since. And so I guess just to wrap up, my priorities, of course, are addressing the homeless and housing issue here in the state and in the region, working on climate justice and workforce development, and making sure our communities have access to good paying jobs from all the infrastructure that's going to be built in the next 5 to 10 years. So those are my priorities, and I guess I will leave it at that.
Okay, great. Terry?
Yeah, and since Duncan explains the district,
Yeah,
that's
no need for
sufficient.
you to do so.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Well, my name's Terry Krieg-Rigsby, running for Metro District 6. I moved to Portland, sight unseen, about 25 years ago from the Washington, D.C.
We did
area.
that too.
Yeah. And, I thought maybe
I have to say, 1995? 97?
Yeah.
Yeah,
97.
95. Okay.
I moved here sight unseen too. So
Yeah.
common trend.
Yeah, it is a common trend.
Yeah.
And, I thought I might, I grew up in Lima, Peru and Port-au-Prince, Haiti. My father was a foreign service, served in the foreign, yep, he was with the State Department. So I, wanted to see a new place. I came here, I fell in love with it. It was really beautiful, really appreciated the, arts and culture, but also access to natural resources so close by, and I've stayed here. So this is my home. I've been here for about 25 years. And during that time, I've been an environmental leader. So I've been with the Trying Creek Watershed Council for about 23 years. For the most part, as chair of the board. Have also stepped in as interim executive director when we had some staff changes. I also have been elected as director and now chair of the West Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District for 16 years. And so in those roles, I've done a lot of on-the-ground restoration work in partnership with nonprofits, city, county, state, and federal agencies. So we've been doing, a lot of work throughout the region, and I work in Clackamas and in Multnomah counties for those projects. And so I did that as a volunteer, and that's my passion, is cleaning up our creeks, adding to our urban canopy forest, and reducing urban heat island effect.
Which is hurting.
It's really hurting. I mean, we're really in a crisis point right
Yeah.
now. And environmentalists, we've known that for a long time. If you look at the species of trees, we knew that they were going to be dying off at about this time. So we've been doing what we can, and we need to invest more. So I did that as a volunteer, but what I did professionally was I was a senior performance auditor under 3 Oregon Secretaries of State. So Bill Bradbury, Kate Brown, and Jean Atkins. And in that capacity, I analyzed publicly funded programs, both state agencies and TriMet. And performance auditors, we identify what's working and where there are opportunities for improvement. So places where we can identify efficiencies, best practices, and innovative opportunities that might be happening elsewhere that we can implement here. And that was really fulfilling work. And however, as an auditor, you don't get to implement the ideas that you present to the state agencies. So, I really look forward to working as Metro Councilor and being able to implement new innovations.
It's like being a journalist.
It is. Well, my first degree is in journalism.
Oh, is it?
So, yeah, from James Madison University.
I'm sorry, did you say you're no longer a performance auditor?
That's correct.
When did you stop?
Let's see. Oh, about 6 years ago. Mm-hmm. I'm a parent, and I had to leave that job to take care of my father. He was terminally ill with brain cancer, so I couldn't commute to Salem. We moved him into our home, and
Which kind?
he had glioblastoma. Yeah. So he was still working and living by himself in Washington, D.C., and we, went there, picked him up, brought him to our home with us, and took care of him through end-of-life care. So, but, that opened up another opportunity for me to get further involved in my community. So for several years now, I've been part of the Southwest Equity Coalition, and we worked hard on passing the trying to pass the transportation bond measure that would have invested not only transportation but also a lot of important affordable housing and commercial investments along the corridor from downtown Portland to Tualatin. And while I was in graduate school, I actually worked at the Portland Development Commission. So I've worked from Lens, working with small business owners to improve their storefronts, to bringing environmental lens and partnership to new affordable housing in the Southwest Corridor, to several transportation projects mostly in the Southwest. So Barber Boulevard, Capitol Highway, Taylor's Ferry, and most recently, something I'm really proud of, we just learned this week, Highway 43 culvert replacement project. That's something I've been working on for 20 years, and it finally was signed by President Biden, and we are moving forward on replacing that project. So,
Wait, what is that? The culvert?
so it's a culvert at the mouth of Tryon Creek, right there at the Willamette River, and we've done a lot of restoration work in Tryon Creek, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service identified our creek as having water quality and habitat that is similarly healthy to rural habitats, but which is really amazing and surprising, and we are very excited about that accomplishment. And so salmon come up the Willamette. They come into the Tryon Creek system as a refugia. It's cool. It's cooler water often, more than the Willamette. And then there's a giant culvert there. So
A culvert's a pipe.
A culvert is a pipe. Yes.
Under the street. Under 43.
Under
Well,
Highway
so
43.
I thought you said they can get up it, but they can't get back down, or what?
So, for about 10 years ago, we worked with Bureau of Environmental Services and other agencies to put baffles in so that the salmon could kind of go up into it, but it's not very effective. So right now the plan is to completely replace it. It's a $60 million project.
And that's money coming from Build Back Better.
It is, and so I represent the state of Oregon on the National Association of Conservation Districts. I'm president of the state association. I represent Oregon State on the national board, and so I've been really involved in advocating for watershed protections and support for our agriculture community at the federal level. And I work with farmers all throughout our state, so it's a really important economic driver for our state. So.
Did you ever read The River Why?
A long time ago.
I think the stream you described sounds like Tryon Creek.
Mm-hmm.
We'll leave that there.
Okay.
So you've had a chance to look at Metro for the last 25 years.
I have, and in fact, I sit on MPAC, Metro Policy Advisory Committee, for about 5 years. I have.
So I would like for both of you to offer us a specific critique of something that Metro is either doing badly, be specific, or isn't doing that it should be doing and will be doing if you're elected or if you keep your seat. Terry, you first, because I think in your campaign material you expressed some frustration with Metro.
I do express frustration.
Okay, so let us know what you're frustrated about.
So I come from a really strong value and ethic of accountability and transparency in government, and that's from my background as an auditor. And I was very invested in the passage of the 2020 transportation bond measure. And I, in my role at MPAC, I could sense from around the room, and leading up to it, because I was with MPAC that was the third bond measure in 3 years, and so there was a plan to implement these in quick succession, and I really wanted the bond measure to pass personally, and I could see that the appetite from the community just wasn't there. And I think a big part of that was not only because it was, the third in 3 years, but also I think there's a lack of trust in all government right now, but also with Metro, because it serves $2.5 million. It's got about $3 billion, and people just aren't seeing work on the ground as quickly as they expect. And so one thing that I think Metro did not do a good job of was listening to its jurisdictional partners. Being in the MPAC meetings, I could hear, I would talk to my colleagues in the 3 counties and the many cities across the region, and they were saying, this is not good for my community. My community is not, there's not the political will right now. People don't want to add another tax to their annual bill. So as counselor, I would improve those relationships with jurisdictions, and first I would work really hard to build accountability and trust again. And I think that means really following through on promises to voters, and making sure that information is very clearly shared and frequently shared, and then improve those relationships.
So at that time, we really were just 2 years past the housing bond, right? The housing bond was 2018.
Mhm.
The supportive housing services measure had just passed. We were, parks had either just passed.
Parks had passed,
Yeah.
correct.
So what do you, can you be a little more specific? I mean, that's
About why people weren't-
that's pretty quick for people to be, was it they didn't want to pay more taxes, which is one thing, or
Correct.
was it they thought Metro wasn't doing
I think both.
what it said it had done?
I think both are true, and actually today, Metro councilors took a vote on natural area acquisitions, and dating back to that bond measure from several years ago. And something that's really specific about that is that when Metro went to voters to build support for the natural areas bond measure, they would talk to environmentalists about protecting a lot of land. They would talk to bicyclists and other recreational users about establishing adequate and more robust recreational opportunities. And that's right there in the measure
Right.
language. And then the ballot measure passes, and it really felt on both sides like Metro was stepping back from some of its promises. So there are people in the environmental community that feel like Metro hasn't done enough per their promises to the voters, and there's extreme frustration also from like mountain bikers in particular.
Oh my God, I hear that all the time.
Yeah, and they're really frustrated too, and like Metro staff and leadership had conversations with both of those, constituent groups, saying we're going to protect, the habitat, and yes, we're going to build all the bike paths. I'm very practical, and I know that there are solutions where you can do both. There's a way to build bike trails that don't ruin, the ecology of a publicly owned land. And when you add in land use and urban growth boundary and trying to have an urban, dense urban area, but still accessible recreational parcels, you need to find those that middle ground where you can improve water quality and habitat protection while also having recreational opportunities. So I think that because of those conversations that occurred, and then subsequent conversations after the ballot measure passed, and then when it was time for the transportation bond measure to, when it was on the ballot, people were just like, well, you're not following through on what you said before.
Okay, great. Duncan, same question for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have a degradation of trust in our institutions, and it's a lot of the reasons that Terry mentioned. I think one thing that Metro needs to do better is in engagement and communication with our stakeholders. We often make decisions without fully consulting with communities. And one example that I can give is I worked for a really long time on the development and construction of a division transit project. But when planners came out in 2013, they're like, we're building a transit line here, and it wasn't the transit line that the community really was looking for. It was actually more on 82nd and the line 72 that gets to jobs in the industrial corridor. So decisions like that are, massive investments are made kind of early on with engagement that happens later. So I think I am really interested in increasing accountability and transparency and bringing in underrepresented communities earlier in the process so that the planning process can be more inclusive and meaningful. I also feel like we don't do a good job of telling the story of Metro, and that's, I think a lot of your listeners probably don't always know what Metro does. It's kind of a obscure agency, and I think it's really important as we talk about the various bond measures and then with the supportive housing measure, just the progress that is happening and also needs to be done, and also I think having some qualitative stories about the impacts in folks' lives of a lot of these bond measures, whether it's affordable housing or supportive housing, like those stories aren't really being told. So I think, yeah, just increasing engagement with various interests, like the Business Alliance and things like that, before we make decisions on funding mechanisms. Like I think we just do a lot of things that had we had more process, more engagement, we would have a better product.
From an outsider's perspective, when we look at Metro's budget and we look at their staffing levels, there's a huge communications team. There's a lot of outreach. So
I think it's inefficient how the resources are distributed within the agency. So like each department has their communications liaisons. I think it should be actually more centralized. And we also have our community organizing capacity building grants in the DEI department. So I think there's a lot of resources being spent, but it needs to be more of a coordinated manner to get better or more of the sum of its parts.
yeah.
Can I ask a quick yes or no question?
Yeah.
Should the dump be free? And could it be? Could you afford to make it free? I'm thinking because, we go out and pick up trash, a group of us,
Sure.
on a lot of Saturdays on the highways and stuff, and
Yeah.
people have said that if the dump were free, it wasn't prohibitive to take stuff to them. I'm not sure it is. I love going to the dump, by the way. I'm a big dump fan.
Yeah.
But should it be free so that people can take trash to the dump and not throw it in the streets?
I know we have free days where that's possible, but I think overall, since we have a hybrid waste management system, Metro sets kind of the regulatory framework and also has our own transfer stations. So we're working in partnership with all these private haulers and transfer stations. So it wouldn't be, I guess, equitable if one was free and then everyone else is trying to
So if
make
you
a
made
living.
the transfer station free, you'd undercut the...
Other transfer stations.
Okay.
Yeah, because Metro has two right now, and
Yeah,
then
you got-
there's a whole bunch
yeah,
of others.
yeah.
So we set the whole kind of regulatory framework, and I think that making it more accessible to communities, and I think that's one thing we're looking at is like how do we build smaller transfer stations around the region rather than two major ones. Making that more accessible would really address illegal dumping. And then I would also say the RID Patrol, the Report Illegal Dumping program that we have at Metro has, really scaled up. Last year in the pandemic, the response time for illegal dumping was 72 days, and the staff have gotten it down to 2 to 4 business days now. We're expanding the teams from 5 to 8.
So this is the groups that go out and, like abandoned camps and things that I see?
Yes.
That's gone from 70, that response time is how long it takes between a report and they get out there?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's, we've really expanded that, put in additional resources. So some elements are free, but I think in the general kind of retail waste management system, I don't think that there is a pathway to having free waste. Like we got to do something with waste.
So, Duncan,
Any thoughts? Wait,
Go ahead, Terry.
did you want to answer that?
Yeah, so, as a member of MPAC, frequently we are looking at the budget for the, waste component of what Metro does. And I agree with Duncan, it would be difficult from a financial perspective to make it free, although I do think that there are a lot of ways that Metro can improve things. So they have increased RID Patrol now, but I think that they need to do more of that until we can at least catch up. I think that they need to reinstate their large item pickups that they used to do in coordination with neighborhoods once or twice a year. And that's not happening anymore. And as someone who lives with a mobility disability, my husband does love to go to the dump, but like I personally cannot go. And, and our elderly, they are not physically able to go. And so we need to have...
Why'd they cut back on those pickups?
You would have to ask the counselors why they did that. And I would, I know you want to keep going.
I don't want to...
Yeah. Duncan, how much money did Pano get from Metro last year?
How much money did we get? I believe in the last couple years, I don't recall, we received a planning grant for 82nd Avenue. I think that was around $220,000 for, it was mainly for consulting services to do a station area plan. And then we have a Nature and Neighborhoods grant for, I think, $100,000 over 2 or 3 years. So yeah, both were awarded much before I was in office. Yeah.
Sure. Now that you are, if you were to remain on, have you thought about what you're going to do in terms of that potential conflict of interest?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it with the city attorneys, the metro attorneys, and I'm not on any of the selection committees, and I'm not the contract manager at Apano, and it's clear that I'm wearing my metro hat. So we've got the.
Do you think it's really possible to make that separation?
I think individual grant award decisions don't come to council. They're all done by committee or at the staff level.
Right, but the staff know that you're an Apano executive.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I would say that there are real and perceived conflicts of interest, and that would declare any potential conflict. And we haven't applied for any funding from Metro since I've been on. But I think that partnership's an important partnership, and I would want to make sure that we're able to continue our partnership with Metro at Apano, but also having clear boundaries about conflicts and disclosures and things like that.
Terry, you want to address that?
As an auditor, I think that. And as someone who's held elected office for 16 years, I really think it's important for leaders to be above reproach. And I respect Duncan as an individual, and I think that it is a very clear conflict of interest that he remains in a leadership position at Apano while he is also elected as a Metro councilor, or appointed.
So how would you suggest that he dispose of that conflict?
I think he should stop working at Apano. I mean, if I were working somewhere, earning income from an organization, also receiving funding in any capacity from an elected body where I was a leader, I would quit that job. To me, that is black and white, and it is a clear conflict of interest.
Duncan, do you want to respond to that?
There's been plenty of examples of other councilors that have other jobs. Councilor Gonzalez, for example, and Councilor Chase before that. And, I think there are clear procedures and processes in place. And, I think on the issue of political compensation, or our compensation, just as with the state legislature, Metro isn't a full-time job. So most councilors have either been retired folks or previous electeds, or they have other jobs, and that's just the reality of how the council is set up.
If I may, simply because it's been done in the past doesn't mean it's right to do now. And I never suggested that our councilors don't have another job. I only think that their other job should not be with an organization that gets any funding from the government agency that they are in a leadership position for. So I recognize, for example, I'm general manager at Hockey Community Organization, it's spelled HAKI. We support East African immigrants and refugees, working along the Southwest Corridor in urban planning, affordable housing, transportation. We don't receive any money from Metro. I would continue in my role there if I were elected, and we would continue to we would not apply for Metro funding. It's just a clear conflict of interest to me. I don't think that this is a complicated issue. Having worked at Secretary of State for many years, for example, I never audited any natural resource agencies because I was chair of a Trine Creek Watershed Council, right? So it would be, it was a conflict of interest for me to audit Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board or Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, or it just.
So let me ask you a question. Then Duncan has said that he wouldn't, as a counselor, he wouldn't be involved in making grants to Apano, and he would essentially wall himself off. And Metro's a big agency; it's got a big budget. The amounts of money that he has mentioned,
they're minimal. Yeah,
they're not minimal. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Correct. Okay.
Do you not think he can wall himself off?
I do not think that is, I don't think so. Because to your point, staff are making decisions, and staff know who leadership is and where they work and where their hurt is outside of the job. And I think that would at the least have some unintended consequences and persuasion, even if they're unintended. And that's something we're working for the Oregon Secretary of State. It was if the Willamette we could put this on the front page, don't do it, kind of thing. And that's the thing. If there's a conflict of interest, then walk away from one of them and do the right thing. Part of the reason why our general public has a lack of trust in government is precisely because of this sort of insider insulated climate that we have. And even if Duncan, I'm not suggesting that Duncan is purposefully would try to persuade decisions, but from a voter's perspective, they see someone who is a leader at a nonprofit that receives money from Metro and is in the highest position of leadership at Metro, which is getting billions of dollars in tax money, and it's just a very clear conflict of interest.
Okay, I think we've covered this issue. Unfortunately, we have another interview right behind this one, so I got to ask you guys a question. We have been asking every candidate, and that is, was there a moment at which the pandemic, which isn't quite over as we know, but felt to you as if it were over? For me, for instance, when I went to the convention center and got my first shot, that was like the most memorable thing that's happened to me in the last couple of years. For another person here, it was when he finally got to go to a Blazers game in person and not watch it on TV. So it could be almost anything, and you may say it's not over for me yet. But Duncan, was there a moment of joy where you said, hey, I'm through the worst of it?
I mean, I think it would be last fall when I was able to fly home to Upper Michigan and visit my parents. I hadn't seen them in 2 years. And eat mom's cooking. So I think that's probably the biggest moment where it was like it felt appropriate to go and visit family.
That's not an easy place to fly to, right? You fly direct. You take that horrible flight from here to Detroit. It's like it lands in Detroit 2 or 3 in the morning.
Is that like the faux red eye?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's like the middle of the night red eye.
Right. Yeah, and then there's like a tiny plane that we only have 2 flights a day to Houghton International. That's actually Houghton Airport. And if you go in the winter and you missed your flight because of a snow, it's like another week before you can fly out. So.
You ever read Jim Harrison?
I haven't. No.
He's UP author.
The Bard of the UP.
The Bard of the UP.
Terry, how about for you? Was there a moment when you felt like it was over?
I'm a parent, and so when my son was able to get his second vaccine, and my husband and I could really, sort of breathe a sigh of relief that all of us were protected, and to see him be able to socialize with his friends after he's 14. Okay. Yeah, he attends Wells, Ida B. Wells Public High School. So he was able to start freshman year in person, which, a lot of, last year's freshmen were not able to do that. So, being a parent is a really big part of my life, and keeping him safe is part of doing, raising someone,
All right, well, thank you both for your time.
Yeah.
Thanks.
You know what freaks me out? English ivy.
Oh, it's terrible. In fact, my spinal injury is as a result of many years of doing